You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the show, and today I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be back for season 7 of our show. I can't believe it. I feel like we say that every year, but it's really come a long way.
I know, from the beginning, seven seasons, and folks are still here listening with us. So excited that we can continue to do this. So with that, as always, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. So today's podcast is sponsored by Allosource. Allosource is one of the largest human tissue providers honoring tissue donors by creating innovative skin allografts to help burn surgeons heal patients. Learn more about Allosource and their continuing education hours by visiting their resource marketplace listing directly on Phoenix Society's website. We'll absolutely put that in the show notes as well. So without further ado, Rachel, if you could introduce the first guest in season 7.
Yes, so today we are joined by Maggie Gould, or Gould. Sorry, I even asked before. Gould is a licensed clinical social worker who has been with the University of Colorado Hospital since 2017, working across various medical settings, including the Burn Center, where she supported survivors and families from the ICU to outpatient care. She now serves on the hospital's palliative care team and continues to lead support groups for burn survivors and their families through Phoenix Society. Maggie is passionate about educating others on the role of social work and healthcare, mentoring interns, teaching as an adjunct professor, and contributing to research and publications. She lives in Denver, Colorado with her husband, Chad, and their Westies, Minnie and Daisy. So Maggie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, to get started, do you just want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you got into social work?
Yeah, of course. Just a little bit about my background and what landed me in healthcare. So like most college students, I was nervous and had no idea what to do. So I took an introduction to social work course and an introduction to teaching course. And I feel like the class that was all about social work just drew me in with this concept and idea that social work is a field that is very broad, and then you can kind of find your specialty or your niche. And the whole field is about helping people in need. And I know that sometimes sounds cliche, like, oh, I work at a job that I want to help people. But I think it was the way that class drew you into just looking at the whole person and who they are and their environment and their systems. And it just felt like it was a training that would allow you to really focus in on who people are at their core, but all of the things that are happening in their life and how that affects who they are as a human being. So I fell deeply in love with social work in that moment. Within the social work pathway, I went to the University of Nevada, Reno. You have to, as a bachelor's, do an internship. So my first internship was in a hospital setting. And not to date myself, but our charts were paper charts back then of how we would go and see patients and whatnot. I was really fortunate enough to study for my master's degree in New York, which allowed me to just explore different areas, like I said, because social work is so broad when you just say it. So I worked with kiddos in a nonprofit, which is where I learned that I don't think that kiddos was the right population for me because my heart just couldn't handle it. And then went back to Nevada and found a career in the healthcare setting. So my first job was in the emergency room, working with patients. They actually didn't have social workers in the emergency room. This was quite a while ago. They had this style where the unit floor social workers would just carry the emergency room pager. And so when they hired me, I was like, I think I want to be down there the full time, like all the time, and helping people in the midst of trauma and chaos and turmoil. And it was amazing. Probably, well, the burn unit was my favorite job, but that job was second favorite just because of the high pace of adrenaline and just helping people in the moments of trauma. And that just really opened my eyes to, the midst of people being in crisis and needing support. So I did that. And then life took me different places. I landed in Denver, and my first hospital role here at the University of Colorado Hospital, they said that their opening was on the burn unit. And that was very intriguing to me. How my boss sold it to me, she was like, it's just like the emergency room, except you get more time with them. And I was like, okay. And just really fell in love with that community. It was really hard to leave that role. I was in that role for 5 years, but it was very heavy and a lot. And so that's what kind of first introduced me into the burn community, where I feel like once you're part of, like we say in support group, once you're part of this family, it's hard to leave. And so I still get to work really closely in conjunction in my new role with the palliative care team, in conjunction with the burn unit, and then obviously running support groups. So that's just a little bit about who I am as a social worker and my career path. And I'm super thankful to work with this community ongoing, even if it's in a different role of just getting to do support group, which is honestly the best part, in my opinion.
Thank you for sharing that with us. If it's okay with you, I think a lot of folks don't understand what social work even is or means. So Can you walk a little bit through what that means to kind of see you as a social worker in maybe the burn unit?
Yeah, of course. And I love that you asked that, because sometimes when people hear the word social worker, they can sometimes be triggered by maybe a past negative experience or their association of only knowing maybe a CPS social worker or something like that. And so for specifically within healthcare, I think the role of a social worker is really to view our patients within the system they live in. So a lot of times, one of our first jobs is to do what we call in social work language a biopsychosocial assessment. And so what that means is doing an interviewer assessment. If you can do it with the patient, great, awesome. Sometimes you have to do that with the family, and really looking at, I would think about it for you yourself, who am I within the environment in the world? So, I am, in my 30s, I live in a home, or I'm facing homelessness, or I work, or I'm on disability, or I don't have an income. Just looking at all the various factors that play into who a human being is, all the way to, can I walk independently, or do I need a cane or walker? And so I think the first initial job and role of a social worker is to assess who the patient is within their environment and their system, and how they function within that. If they're struggling, and really do an assessment, a needs assessment. Does this person have really great psychosocial support? Do they have family, friends that invest in them? Are finances strained or come easily because they have a good income? And so it's really the training that we have is to look at who a person is in their environment and how they interact with that. And so I think it's also key to know that each hospital system is really unique in how they employ and view the social work role. So to be a social worker, you have to get a bachelor's degree, get a master's degree, and then do 30, depending on your state, 3,600 clinical supervision hours. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And what that means is I could have the ability with that training to just have a private practice where I do therapy with people, where I do cognitive behavioral therapy. I could name off a bunch: acceptance and commitment, solution focused, right? So that could be my career focus. But each hospital kind of views a social work role a little bit different. So I've worked in hospitals where they have social workers that are more in that care management role, which means kind of doing that biopsychosocial assessment. Okay, this person came into the hospital, they're really sick, they're unhoused, they don't have support, they're going to go amputation. How do we get them a safe discharge plan when they're ready to leave the hospital? And having that social work lens. And I've also seen institutions where the social worker kind of partners as really that mental health professional. So their role is to assess what is the trauma that this person went through with this burn injury? How are they coping? How are they healing? What supports do they have? Do they have any underlying mental health diagnoses that impact their ability to cope and process? And so I think holding that in both. And so, knowing that an institution can have a social worker on the burn team that maybe sometimes plays both of those roles. Is their focus really sometimes that discharge planning piece? And that can kind of be institution specific.
Well, thanks.
That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, how your previous, when you were getting to your role at University of Colorado, how you got to work with them longer in the burn unit. Can you kind of talk about like what that means? I know you talked about that initial, examination that you do, but like, how do you work with patients from the ICU onward?
Yeah, of course. And I would say, and I can even just like give maybe like a patient example, and I'll change some of the names and stuff for HIPAA. But let's say you have like a young male who comes in who was involved in like a work accident and an explosion, right? And is burned, 70% TBSA. So my role initially would be to figure out who is the patient at that first day. Sometimes it really is a little bit like detective, like what's their name? Who are their people? Do they know what's happening in their life? Like kind of like crisis trauma mode, right? We're about to intubate them and they are about to enter our world in a journey that they never even knew existed. So for example, that first day, my role could be like figuring out who they are, detective work. Okay, this is, John, and John has these people in his life, and finding those people. I really worked in partnership in conjunction with my burn team to kind of change the flow of how we like monitor and support a burn patient and their family when they're specifically in the ICU, to require and advocate that we have at day one and then weekly multidisciplinary care meetings, and to change that culture of like, this is what we do and how we provide good practice instead of we should do this or this, because I just think it's so scary. There's so much trauma, right? So, John gets there, we find his wife or his family. And, within the first 24 hours, I think it's really essential. As most of us know in the burn community, that first 24 hours are really critical with like values of, resuscitation, the first 24 hours of, I'm not a nurse or doctor, but all the levels and all the fluid and things like can really be super traumatic and intense that 24 hours. So kind of like setting the stage, having a family meeting. A lot of times my beginning work, I would say if it's a big burn, like a 70%er, I don't even actually get to meet the patient for a while. And so I actually become, really close with like their family, like their parents or their loved ones, and really navigating like how to support them, right? Do they live locally or were they flown? We get a lot of patients flown from like out of state. So that can just add like a whole other layer of trauma, right? Like I can't, how do I get there? Where do I stay? Where do I sleep? So like accessing lodging resources, figuring out how to support them and navigate so that they can be present and be there. Also like gently providing education around the fact that this is a very like life-threatening serious injury, and that this is, a marathon and going to take a lot of time. But our focus right now is like keeping your loved one alive. So, and initially I would say like setting up, managing those meetings, doing a needs assessment, and then over time, really trying to incorporate in the patient being the focus of those meetings, right? And depending on how sick they are, they're navigating ICU delirium, they're in and out of consciousness, like slowly trying to get them to be part of those meetings so that they can engage, meet the team who's taking care of them. Like who is this dietitian that's like encouraging me to drink, protein shakes, or who is this OT that's telling me to stretch and PT and so different things. And so I think my role kind of would change with where they were at in their admission, right? And so over time, when they can engage in their care and participate, then I think it's really key to bring in all of those other elements. And one of the things I love about being a social worker, right, is even in those meetings, like The dietitian is focused on their calorie intake. That is their role. That is what they should be doing. The physical therapist is focused on their movement and their, how they're going to have range of motion. The physician is focused on their grafts and their burn areas and their wounds. And then my job and my training is, who is this person, John, and all these things relating to who he is and how he's coping and how he's processing with this. How is he processing mentally? How is he processing emotionally, spiritually? Like, there's so much to who our patients are as human beings. And our job as a social worker is to see all those elements, right? And like we talk about in social work, like Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? If somebody doesn't have food and shelter, it's really hard for them to think about processing what their grafts and their scars are going to look like, right? So some of our patients who are navigating homelessness, really helping like, all right, what's your insurance? We need to get you long-term disability. What's your source of income? Where are you going to go after? Are you functionally going to be able to move? Do you have support and caregivers? And so I think it's really a journey. I think my longest burn patient that I had the honor of working with was like over 2 years. She was at 93%. And so like my work and ability to do some of those like interventions changes based on, right, like a 2% maybe in the outpatient for a few days, and really get to follow them across the continuum of care, right? To see them in the ICU, to see them get to step down, to see them more engaged in their care, to see them discharged to clinic and then come in. And then that's where my favorite part of the work happens, which is things that result in this amazing podcast, right? Like, do you know about the Phoenix Society? We've had, I've invited you to support group multiple times during your admission, and them finally being able to engage and like mentally and emotionally process. I think some of the biggest part of healing and being a burn survivor actually happens later when they are like, what do you mean? I just woke up from this coma, or, and it takes them time with the trauma to catch up, and like really coaching families through that too, right? Like you could have a mom who's like 3 months in, and like for the first time, their son is aware of what's happening. And it's like, whoa, mom, like you've had 3 months of us meeting, talking, processing the trauma. This is maybe like day one for your person. And so like, what is the differentiation in that? And I now realize I'm on a rant of talking of all the things, but I'll pause. But basically there's a lot of different things I think that you could do as a social worker, depending on where you're at in that healing process with a patient and family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. Like when we hear social work, like you were talking about, there are so many different avenues that you can be a social worker in, so many obviously different units, like you said, like PT, we kind of all understand what PT does. And it's obviously different in different units and different hospitals and different settings, but kind of the same all around. So it was really, like I said, and as burn survivor, like myself as a kid, I'm sure, I did talk to the social worker, but can't really tell you that relationship because, especially for children, I'm sure you're working so much more closely with their families, with their parents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, I know you kind of talked about obviously working with the families, but you kind of mentioned this a little bit about how you love, one of your passions is facilitating those family meetings. Like why kind of getting connected to, families or friends or that support system? Like, why is that so important to do early on?
Yeah. One, I would say, like just recognizing that like families and patients are navigating significant trauma and like trauma work. And like the goal with anyone navigating trauma is to get them to like post-traumatic growth eventually later on. And I think the way to do that is to really foster a safe environment where people and their patients and their families feel really cared for and supported, and like they're getting real, honest, direct communication. Depending on the severity of the burn, sometimes, that care is so important because people don't survive and they don't live to thrive, and they do approach end of life. And so I think doing that in a way that's also very gracious and kind and, trauma informed is like the word we would use. But I think that's coming at it from a lens of really wanting to be mindful and intentional that we have just like encountered someone whose entire world has been flipped upside down. And so, I can't imagine, like, I don't know your story specifically, but like your parents navigating for you as a little one, right? Like what was that like for them? How were they supported? Who can they lean on to cope? Like, what are their coping skills? Everybody copes in trauma differently, and everybody has their own story, right? So, of past things they've navigated, past grief, past loss, past trauma that might be reignited by this event that's happening. We don't know what's going on in their lives, right? They could have a mom at home on hospice, and then their son is involved in this horrific accident. So I think why it's so important to answer your question is to provide good care. And that is one of the missions, I think, of a hospital, and specifically a burn center, I would argue, is like hyper intentional about that, because we know that the journey, this is a life-altering traumatic injury, but it doesn't have to be life-ending, and it can change, like, right, the way you interact and interface with the world and your identity when you survive an injury like this. And I think that starts day one, from walking in or being rolled into those doors, or the family walking in. And so how we interact and care for them, I think is really key. Like, how you make people feel is remembered and known. And so I think, like, my heart, and I could speak for my burn center's heart, is always to try to make people feel cared for and supported and loved. And, that's a hard task when there's a lot of trauma and a lot of scary things happening around them.
So Maggie, you mentioned that you are an adjunct professor as well. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about kind of what you'd wish future social workers, right, or what your hope is to do when you're be trying to inspire future social workers. Specifically, I think, like, it's just interesting that you're in burn care, right? Do you apply the burn care setting to your work as an adjunct professor at all?
Yeah, I think my work history, especially now being in palliative care, which a lot of people have a misconception about what that is, definitely impacts how I teach. I teach at two different universities. One, I teach a specific social work in healthcare class. In one, I'm more of like an adjunct faculty liaison, because every social worker in their training has to do an internship, and they have to get those clinical hours. And so I'm kind of the liaison for the university, checking in at internships, like across the world, basically. Like, I have folks doing therapy, working in homeless shelters, working in schools. And so it's nice that I get to kind of do that broader, what social work is, and then that specific social work in healthcare. I think, just like with the world that we live in, something that I would like really want to instill within my like future social workers is really just like the intentionality of like showing up and being present, and allowing the human being that you interact with to feel a sense of dignity and worth in every interaction that you have with them. And I also just think, like, I've had like 2 or 3 really beautiful moments in my career where I actually got to find out what I did mattered. And we don't always get that in social work, right? We don't get like a letter or a note that's like, hey, you were really super helpful to me at this point in my life, and now I'm like doing really great. And I'm fortunate enough, because I've been doing this for so long, to have had like 1 or 2 of those interactions. And I think what like humbles me to that is to know like what I do actually does matter, even though I don't always get to hear about it and know about it, which that's not why I do it. I don't do it to hear that or know that. And that's mostly, social workers know that going into this field. Like, my favorite question to ask somebody is like, why do you want to be a social worker? Like, what's your drive? What's your why? And I think that should be our question to patients a lot of the times, or to people or clients, wherever setting we're in, of, why is it that you do what you do? And I think what I would encourage students studying this field is to really find your why, and then really lean into that, to just help you to see patients in a way, or clients in a way that just makes them to feel seen and heard. And I think that's really key.
I love that. When I know you mentioned too, specifically in the burn unit, can get really heavy. So how do you take care of yourself, and what advice would you give other social workers who may be just starting in the burn unit or burn care?
Yeah. I think really being in tune. I think this answer has evolved over time. And I think literature is kind of changing on this like concept of self-care and like how to talk about that and frame that, because then it can just kind of feel like a task or a to-do. But I think it's really like being on a journey of learning yourself. One of the most traumatic parts for me being on the burn unit, honestly, just living in Denver, was when it would snow. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to come in on Monday and we're going to have frostbite patients and we're going to cut off their limbs. And then they're going to be like, Maggie, discharge them. And it's like so traumatic. And so when I started to recognize some of those signs of like, the snow in Denver that's beautiful, that's supposed to bring me joy, is causing me like anxiety. I think that was helpful for me to learn of like, okay, like what can you control? Where do you need help? So I think in those instances, I did a lot of things of like asking leadership for help in that time from my institution of like, I need more staffing. I need more help. Like I remember we had a horrible snowstorm and I walked into 25 admissions and I was just like, I cannot do this alone. And that community was really great and helped me. But I think as a professional, it's taken me a really long time to differentiate like fully showing up, fully being present, being engaged in my job. I walk through those doors of the hospital and I am there as your social worker to support and walk through this with you. And when I leave through those doors, I am Maggie, wife, friend, daughter, sister. And how do I allow myself, we talk about a lot in the profession of like vicarious trauma. And, it is traumatic seeing these really hard, difficult things as a healthcare professional. And I think it has taken time for me to differentiate to be able to say like, today I'm social worker Maggie, today I'm daughter, wife, friend Maggie. And I think over time, like, I can give you all those like textbook answers of like, sleeping and working out and, yes, be who you are and find what brings you joy and passion. But I really think for me, like learning like, okay, this is not my trauma. My job sometimes simply is to bear witness to this trauma and support and love and care for. And then my job is to, be home and be me and play with my dogs and just like, be a part of this world. Right. And so I think for everybody that looks a little bit differently, right? Like I find a really lot of strong support in my faith. And for some people, it could be nature, being outdoors or whatever that might be for you as an individual. So I would say for like up and coming social workers in burn units, like, yes, this is hard. It should be hard. It really should impact you because it's real. It's real trauma. It's real things. I'd be worried if it didn't. It should be. And now you recognize that. And how do you respond? And what do you do with that? And how do you cope and process? And how do we model that, right? We're navigating patients and families through really horrific, traumatic things. And we're telling them things like, make sure you eat, make sure you go home, make sure you sleep. Okay, so we need to be able to do those things as professionals too, and having that healthy balance. And so I definitely think I do it a lot better many years into my career than when I was starting out.
I think we can all relate to that.
Yes. Well, we are going to switch it up a little bit today and hope you'll play a fun little game with us. We're going to do a little myth versus truth,
Ooh, okay.
kind of lightning round. So we'll give ourselves like a minute per question and ask you these questions and then like quick myth versus truth. You can answer and then give it like a little why you're answering the question the way you are. Okay. So if it's a myth, obviously you can say it's a myth if it's truth. But so let's start with the first question. Once the skin heals, the hard part is over. And these are statements like that we're making.
I'm laughing because that is the biggest myth ever.
So tell us a little bit about why.
I think that is just the physical representation of the trauma you've been through. And unfortunately, there's no visual representation of the trauma that your mind, heart, and spirit has gone through. And sometimes I would argue that the hardest work begins internally, processing, going through what you just went through, having therapy, EMDR, whatever you need to do for you. And, we all know too, just because that skin is healed does not mean that, you don't need sunblock or you don't need, there's so many other things that come with that. So I would say definite myth.
Okay.
Yes,
Next
yes.
question. Children are more emotionally resilient after burn trauma than adults.
I think I would say true and. I think that children are a lot more resilient than we as adults give them credit for. I also think there's a lot of things that go into how where a child is at developmentally, and a 2-year-old in this family and that family system that's really healthy, supportive, and great, and a 2-year-old in this family system that's maybe a little bit more dysfunctional, has a little bit of history of trauma, is a little bit unsafe at times, I think can impact their ability to cope. So I would say truth and it depends.
I love that. Rachel, you're up.
Grief has a set timeline.
Oh, absolutely. Biggest myth ever. This really plays a lot actually in my new role with palliative care. Grief is, contrary to this popular, Kubler-Ross, the 5 stages we move through, that was great when it was brought up. That's awesome. I love that we started talking about grief. But I would definitely say if people still think that is the way it is, it's definitely not linear. It is very fluid and it's never, ever done. I think that, which I'm sorry to express to you, I think it can be more manageable, but how to learn to live post burn injury, is going to take time, and there will always be things that come up and moments that remind you, and this sense of loss and grief of something that was before or something that can't be, whether that's disenfranchised grief or complicated grief. There's just so many types of grief that I could just go on a whole other podcast for, but I would definitely say myth on that one.
What about if someone isn't crying, they aren't grieving?
Ooh, yeah, no, myth. I think everybody processes and copes differently, and tears, I think, can be a beautiful space and allow someone to express, but there are a lot other ways that grief can show up in somebody's body, whether it's like pit feelings or their behavior, especially in little ones, behavioral changes. So I don't think it necessarily has to be tears.
I think that's really important to highlight, like behavioral changes, right? Because sometimes we think kids are acting out because they're acting out, but that can actually not be true at all, right? And they're acting out because something is bothering them. And they don't know how to show their emotions. I'm learning this a lot with my toddler right now. Like, he doesn't always know how to show how he's feeling. And so he'll hit, kick, scream, right? And that might just be that he's stressed or something's bothering him. And so it's really hard for kids because they don't always understand.
Yeah.
So talking about your loss is a vital part of healing.
I would say that is true, but I don't think I get to tell you when and how that happens. And I also don't think I get to tell you who that happens with. I think that talking about your loss in a therapeutic supportive setting can be helpful. I would argue that, right, you just went through all of these surgeries, all of these workouts, all these other things. Like, what did we do for your emotional and psyche healing? And I think, yes, could that be done in other ways of hiking or being outside or coloring? Sure. And I think allowing yourself space, whether that talking is to someone or writing or journaling, I would say that I think personally that some form of talking about your loss would help when you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, as we're kind of talking about grief too, I do just want to plug too, we have a grief counselor coming on later this season.
Awesome.
Because I know a lot of times when we think about grief, it's about losing someone, which is certainly one aspect. But as a burn survivor, you go through different forms of grief. It doesn't just have to be after the loss. So, I think a lot of this to keep for our listeners to keep that in the back of their mind of grief isn't just about losing someone. It's about, you can lose part of your identity as a burn survivor. And that's a really important aspect to, the grieving and healing journey as well.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. I'll be listening in for that one. I think I'm glad we're touching on that.
Yes. So still kind of talking about, grief and trauma. What about trauma-informed care is crucial in medical settings, especially for burn survivors?
Yes, truth. And I think ensuring that all providers have that training. I think sometimes maybe social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists have a little bit more emphasis in their training on how to do that. And then I think, being really mindful and providing support to other members on the team about how to have that approach. I work really closely with a music therapist who one of her passions is to really educate. Sometimes it's a common practice to like, oh, what kind of music do you like? Let's play it in wound care. And she's like, oh, please don't do that. Because if they really loved it before, and then you're associating it with this traumatic, really hard thing, you might ruin that for them, or at least like getting permission. So I think even just like the intentionality of having that trauma-informed lens from all areas is super key and super important.
I love that because I listen to a lot of music during my recovery, but sometimes it can be super triggering to listen to that one song. Like there's this one song from Jose that I used to listen to all the time, and I still love listening to it, but I listen to it from the lens of like, oh, it's a strong song rather than like it being just about liking that song. So interesting that you say that.
No,
Yeah.
I have such a similar story. I know the song's kind of making a comeback on, TikTok right now, but the song I Woke Up in a New Bugatti? Well, I made that my alarm clock in college freshman year because I thought it was the funniest thing, and now that song is just so cringy to me
everywhere.
I just think about waking, and now it's everywhere.
My husband has this song that he uses on his alarm, and I like can't listen to it anymore because it just reminds me of all the times that I didn't get up in the morning.
Yep.
Exactly. Let's talk through support groups. Support groups are just for crisis care. True or false?
I think it can be for some people, yes. And I also want to acknowledge that some people might not feel that support group setting is where their healing can happen. So I think we should offer them. I think we should encourage them. And I think we should give people autonomy and a choice if that feels right for them.
I'm going to go myth on this one because I know like I joined support groups early on, and I feel like now sometimes it's just to check in, right? And like I think not everyone needs it for crisis care. I think there are opportunities for us to have support groups surrounded around just like community. But yes, recognizing they are also for crisis care. But I think there was a group of us at one point that just felt like, okay, support group isn't just for that. There are folks that are using it for that, but then there's a whole other group of us that like just have that support group around being a burn survivor in a community in the world that we live in today. So I think that's also an important part of it.
For sure.
What about you shouldn't talk about the person who died because it might upset someone?
Yeah, I would say myth on that. One of the big things I remember a lot would be we'd have like traumatic accidents where maybe one of the survivors doesn't know that somebody in the car died, right? And they're now in the burn unit and navigating. And I would really always try to take the lens and approach of if they're asking, they're ready. And I also think, you can have those conversations with people. Again, this is so unique. Like my social work lens of like, some people that could be triggering, but I also think, that creating a safe space where those emotions can be expressed. And I also think for some people, talking about someone that has died is a way to continue to honor them and love them and bring them into their life today. And so I would hate to like say, don't do that to someone if that's how their own coping needs to process, is to like remember and talk about that person.
Definitely.
I like that answer. So we have a couple left. Strong people don't need therapy.
I would say myth. I think there are awesome, strong people that don't need it, and that's great and awesome. But I also think it takes a lot of like introspection and wisdom to say that you need, and that's not even help, but that you need a space to process what you're going through. And I definitely practice what I preach, in that I am in therapy every month and need it and want it, in terms of a space to have somebody that's not biased and loves me. Like, my husband's great and all, but he's real biased. He loves me a lot. So like what he says is not always encouraging of what I need to reflect back on, how I'm processing things, or if I'm being unreasonable, which definitely happens. So I think, I think
you need someone to challenge you, I think, and check you, right? Like, and my husband does do that. I have like, sit down, you're wrong. But somebody who's going to, like, be able to challenge you in those situations is important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kind of in that same idea, what about if a patient doesn't ask for help, they must not need it?
Oh, no, I think that would be part of our role, to really do that deep dive assessment, because sometimes asking for help that's a foreign concept. They've never done that. They've always been independent. They've never needed that. I see this a lot too with our folks navigating homelessness, which is sometimes a really high burn patient population that doesn't get a lot of attention. And they have navigated homelessness and being on the streets and fending for themselves. And so I think it's kind of like this foreign, what do you mean, like, to ask for help and support people? So I think our job is to always offer and educate, never force, obviously, but to just let people know what's available and how we can help them, if they're open to wanting to have some of those conversations.
I know the homeless population here in Orlando, I think there was a big, when I was burned anyway, they talked a lot about how that was unfortunately a population of folks that were burned quite often, and for whatever reason, right? They don't have access to the things like my husband and I always talked about, like, how do you get dressings, right? And so a lot of the homeless folks would have to come into the unit every single time they needed a dressing change because they didn't have the resources. And so that can be really tough, right, to think about. And so it is a very, very difficult thing to face. I can only imagine. All right. Sharing your story publicly is always empowering.
I would actually say myth. I think as much as I love open mic, and it's like probably my favorite part of World Burn, I just think every person is so unique in who they are and how they process. Same kind of concept with support group. And some people do a lot better one-on-one and they feel more safe. And public speaking can be scary and overwhelming and very vulnerable. And so I would say myth on that one.
Yeah, I think again, I agree with you. Like, open mic is wonderful, but also, like, if you think about open mic and you shed out, like, the fact that we were burned, right? Like, some people just can't get up in front of a group of people and talk. Like, they have that fear. And I think, like, it's different when open mic was, like, virtual, right? Because it's easier to kind of get on a screen, in my opinion, and talk. But to get up in front of a group of people and talk in general is scary, never mind sharing your story. So I can't agree with you more on that one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have one more for you, and it's definitely best, or it's best not to bring up trauma once someone looks like they've moved on.
I would definitely say myth on that. I think talking about trauma can be one of the ways to heal and move through it and get to post-traumatic growth, which is just this term of, like, looking at, like, how that trauma has impacted somebody and their life is different and changed in how they're embracing that and coping with that. And so, I think obviously be a kind human that's sensitive of, like, time, space, and the environment. But I also think sometimes people need also education that, like, what you are going through is traumatic. This is trauma. What is trauma? Have you ever gone through it? Do you know what it is? Do you know how it impacts you? Do you know what, nightmares are, flashbacks, like, just education too, because we also have to have this lens as a social worker. I haven't touched on this in our talk, but of, like, a sense of health literacy, and everybody's health literacy and where they are and understanding the world that they were just placed into is very different. Not only health literacy, but then burn world health literacy. Like, it's like 2 degrees that you're getting of, like, what are you talking about? Like, speaking in shorthand, TBSA, like, what does that mean? And so I think really being mindful of that. And so, yes, I would say it's important to talk about those things.
Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on time. We're going to ask one more question, and then we're going to head to our final questions, which I'm sure you're familiar with. What is something you wish more people understood? And this can be about social work in general or about palliative care, because I think that's something we touched a little bit on during this episode as well.
I wish people understood that, palliative care and burn can really go hand in hand. And honestly, I would advocate that any big, serious burn injury needs the support of palliative care. Palliative care is just a specialty in medicine that comes around people. The word palliate comes from this Greek word that means to cloak and wrap around and support. And the beauty that I love about working in palliative care is that it's not necessarily end of life. And I think sometimes people misconstrue that. And so it really just means to wrap around, cloak, support, and learn about our patients as people. What I love about my role now is I have the time to sit down with patients and families for 2+ hours to learn about who they are, what's important to them, what are their goals, and what type of human being they are, to really support and wrap them through that process. So I think there can be a world where they work together to meet people's goals. And so I think just knowing that these services are there to support patients and families, and I would just encourage to have an open mind and ask questions and be curious. And if it's not for you, that's okay too. There is a sense of autonomy of these supports, and if you want to engage with them or not.
Awesome. Well, we always ask our guests 2 final questions. And this season we're switching it up. In the essence of mental health, I am going to ask you, what gives you hope when you're, things are feeling heavy, you're having a tough day, or even just when it's not just a tough day, maybe it's a tough week. What gives you hope?
I think personally for me, it's just my faith and also my family, of just knowing that life is so precious, and I just feel this overwhelming sense of gratitude and gratefulness to have the life that I have and the people that I get to serve, but also my family that I just get to enjoy and spend time with and make memories with. And that for me just gives me hope and the sense of peace in knowing who I am not only matters, but that I'm touching the lives of the people around me in hopefully a positive way.
That's beautiful.
I love it. Well, our final question, Maggie, is our Phoenix Partner question today, sponsored by Allosaurus. So their question is, what do you hope someone listening today takes away or feels or learns from your story?
I think I just hope that they know that whoever they are, whether it's a burn survivor or someone just being curious or a family member, that who you are in the world has so much worth and value, and that you sometimes don't even get to know how much that is and how much you matter. And that I just want you to feel supported and cared for and loved. And if you're not feeling that, to reach out, ask for help, which I know can be hard. Just if there's things that you need to navigate and use as tools to help you navigate through life, those exist and are there. And things like this podcast and the Phoenix Society and social workers in your life are there and want to just walk on your journey with you.
Well, that's awesome. We truly appreciate you joining and answering some hard-hitting questions with us today. We had some fun here. Before we close out, is there anything else you want us to know? I would love to hear about Minnie and Daisy. They sound wonderful.
They're so fun. I could actually just hear her barking in the background. The puppy is new. Actually, in the spirit of grief, Minnie did pass away last week, and so we are navigating that. But it's okay. In that, even what I do and talk about every day and relating it to my dog is helpful. But I also just think the silver lining of we had just gotten Daisy, and they had a couple months together, and she is just, we call her Crazy Daisy. She is so much energy.
I'm so sorry to hear your family. So I know from firsthand experience how hard that is, but it sounds like Daisy is keeping you busy and reminding you of how wonderful Minnie was.
Yes, all the time. So we're very thankful for her. Thank you both so very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
We will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.